Why podcasting? What was it about it? What is it about it for you? Because I know I've got my own experience and feelings about this, but I want to hear it from your words of what it.
I'm happy to share. And I also am curious. I would love to hear your experience as well. So for me, what happened is that I was writing. I've always been a writer. I was writing guest posts for the Huffington Post and similar. And I had success with that. And I had an example pitch for a podcast sitting in my downloads folder from a friend, right? The downloads folder, which at least for me is where all good intentions go to die. And I was intimidated. Like I was in my head and I was like, so I just didn't do anything with it. And I was 8 months pregnant with my now 5-year-old. So PTSD, extreme anxiety, all the things you can imagine going on when you are pregnant after the kind of loss that I experienced, right? And somebody reached out and said, hey, will you be on my podcast? And it was like an acquaintance. And I was like, okay. So I didn't have to pitch. Great. So I wound up delivering, no pun intended, that interview from a labor and delivery triage bed where I was being monitored because I had a doctor appointment in the morning. Oh, they sent me up for additional monitoring because everyone's treating me with kid gloves, which I appreciated. And they're like, okay, we need to monitor movement, whatever. And I was like, but I am a podcast interview. So they got me hooked up. Everything was fine. And learning to use my voice, I said to the nurse, look, I know this is going to sound crazy, but can you just turn off the beeps? You can watch me from the nurse's station. I've got an interview I would really like to keep. And they were like, let's not stress out the double high risk, crazy pregnant lady. Let's
just do what she says.
Right.
This was your first interview that you had done? Oh my God.
Yes. Yeah. I could show you the picture. I'm like, all strapped up in a gown with my little thing and my computer. And what I found was that even under those circumstances, I fell in love with it. I loved the ability to connect with another person one-on-one and go deep. And to be able to just flow in that conversation and connect and then have it get shared. And I was like, I can't think of an easier way to get in front of people. And then as I began to proactively do it, then I began to study why is it? Why is it so fun for me? Why is it so effective when it's done right? And how can we, make it better? And I didn't start my podcast until I got invited to speak at PodFest. And I was like, I should probably have a podcast before I go speak at the podcasting conference.
It's not necessarily a prerequisite, but
right, exactly.
Maybe.
I had been planning it for 7 months. I had been kind of recording and batching, and then I got that acceptance, and I was like, all right, this seems like a good push me to get it out there.
Put it in the world.
Yeah, but guesting for me was just it just effortless, and it was so energizing, and it was something I was able to come down and do with very little prep in between nursing my baby and naps and all this stuff. And that kind of fueled my life because I was getting to connect with so many cool people. And so it just felt like for a non-salesy, non-pushy, just genuine person who wants to build my business based on connection, I was like, this.
No doubt. I wasn't in a hospital bed doing my first interview, but I think I caught on to the power of the interview probably in 2012, I want to say, when I first kind of fully leaped into the digital space. And at that time we were doing webinars very early, 2012. And the level of connection that you could have with a person where you could share a message and get the feedback loop and that type of thing, that was what kind of hooked me initially. But it wasn't until, because I just launched my own personal podcast here in August of last year. So there was a big gap there and a lot of content created in the meantime. I just didn't frame it as a podcast. It was just I created content. I did sales videos. I put content out into the world. But when I went to launch here, it was actually January 2021 when I said, I'm going to do a podcast, and I launched it in August. So I was relating to what you were saying there too. I was recording things and batching stuff up, and then I didn't put it into the world. My hesitation were those 4 points that you just said: overthinking, Trevor, it's like, what should I name it? I went through like 50 different iterations of a name. And then eventually I was like, wait a second, this is my podcast. This isn't a gimmicky thing to make sales. Like, but naturally the story for me was, well, who am I to have my own podcast in my own name? Like Lewis doesn't have a podcast in his own name. This is where my head was going. And I was like, well, Joe Rogan does, but I'm not Joe Rogan, It's such a crazy, crazy experience. But I dove into it, and my first episode I recorded solo, and nothing went how I was wanting it to. None of the audio or the lighting or anything worked. I had a guy in our house doing gas fitting. The dog was barking. People were free. Like it was just chaos. But I thought to myself, just show up here and just speak from the heart and know that it's going to be an absolute kind of like disaster the way it comes out, but it'll be perfect. And it was. And it was. And ever since then, I've just trusted that I will understand where this is going to take me. And my first 30 episodes, I did mostly interviews. I did 2 solo episodes that were mostly just reviews of like what came up for me over the last 10 episodes. How did I change my beliefs based on the guests that I brought on? And then in January this year, I decided that it's time to start speaking my truth, and not really knowing how far I wanted to push that boundary even too of what I believe to be true. So I started with the most obvious that was happening in the world, which was just lockdowns and mandates and how it was impacting me as a dad, not being able to take my kids to swimming lessons because I've chosen not to get vaccinated and all of that stuff. And there was angry me coming out. And then I was like, oh my God, they're going to see the 14-year-old in me that used to just fight as a young hockey player, and everybody's going to hate me and my family won't talk to me. It was so crazy, all these thoughts that were going through my head. And then what actually happened though was like, it just unlocked everything for me. It's only been 6 weeks since I launched that, where, now I jump on a post that you put out, which I normally wouldn't have done that either. But I was like, I need to connect with people that can relate to the journey that I've been on, and then have conversations like this. This is all I want to do now. Mm-hmm. That's it.
That's it. I literally just said that to 2 of my friends today. I was like, I just love interviewing and being interviewed so much. How can I just make my business where I'm just doing that?
Right. And then naturally, as you start to get past that, like, okay, yeah, that is amazing, and let's do that. But then how do we actually ripple that out into the world to then create change and to impact other people and be a part of the positive elevation of consciousness in this world? Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that clip and you want to watch the full unedited episode, go ahead and click over here. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. Thanks so much.